The bitter December wind howled through the Wyoming valley, drowning out Katherine Nelson's weakening cries for help as her fingers clawed at the frozen earth beneath Blackwater Bridge. The year was 1878, and Katherine, or Kate as she preferred, had lost everything, her money, her horse, and now, it seemed, her very life to the merciless winter storm that had descended without warning across the frontier. The blizzard had appeared from nowhere, transforming the relatively mild winter day into a nightmare of swirling white. Kate had been traveling to Silver Creek to start anew after fleeing her uncle's home in Missouri. At 22, she'd had enough of his drunken rages and wandering hands. The teaching position waiting for her in Silver Creek promised independence and dignity, things she had yearned for since her parents' deaths 3 years prior. But fate had other plans. Her horse had spooked at a rattlesnake 6 miles back, throwing her before bolting away with her meager possessions. The bridge had offered the only shelter for miles around as the temperature plummeted and snow began falling in earnest. Kate's teeth chattered uncontrollably as she huddled against the stone foundation of the bridge. Her wool coat, once adequate, now seemed as insubstantial as tissue paper against the howling wind. Her fingers had long since gone numb, and she couldn't feel her toes inside her boots. Consciousness came and went like the flicker of a dying candle. "This is how I die," she whispered, her voice barely audible even to herself, alone and forgotten under a bridge in the middle of nowhere. She closed her eyes, no longer able to fight the cold that penetrated to her very bones. As darkness crept into the edges of her vision, the muffled sound of hoofbeats broke through the wind's moaning. Kate tried to call out, but her voice failed her, emerging as nothing more than a rasp. The hoofbeats stopped, and for a terrible moment she thought she had imagined them a cruel trick of a dying mind. Then came the sound of boots crunching on snow and a deep voice calling out, "Hello? Anybody down there?" Kate tried again to make a sound, managing only a weak moan. It was enough. A moment later, a tall figure appeared, dropping down from the road above with surprising agility. Through frost-crusted lashes, Kate made out the silhouette of a man in a heavy coat, a wide-brimmed hat shadowing his face. "Good Lord," he muttered, crouching beside her. "What in heaven's name are you doing out here, miss?" Kate couldn't answer. Her lips refused to move, frozen into stillness. Without hesitation, the stranger removed his heavy duster coat and wrapped it around her, then gathered her frozen form into his arms. The sudden warmth of his body against hers was so shocking that a small cry escaped her lips. "Easy now," he murmured, his breath warm against her ear as he cradled her against his chest. "I've got you. You're going to be all right." His voice was deep and steady, with a slight drawl that spoke of Texas origins. As he carried her up the embankment, his strong arms never wavered despite the treacherous footing. "My name's Francis Morgan," he said, his words forming small clouds in the frigid air. "Most folks call me Frank. I've got a cabin not far from here. We need to get you warm and quick." He lifted her onto his horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion, before mounting behind her, one arm securely around her waist. He turned the horse toward shelter. Kate leaned back against his solid chest, unable to do anything else as the cold and exhaustion claimed her consciousness. "Stay with me now," Frank whispered, his mouth close to her ear as he urged the horse forward. "Stay with me. I'll keep you warm. Just hold on." His words followed her into darkness as she slipped into unconsciousness, aware only of the steady rhythm of his heartbeat against her back and the solid strength of his arms around her. When Kate next opened her eyes, she was lying beneath a pile of thick quilts before a roaring fire. The cabin was small but solidly built, with rough-hewn log walls and a sturdy wooden floor. A pot bubbled on a cast-iron stove, filling the single room with the savory aroma of beef stew. She tried to sit up but fell back with a gasp as pain shot through her extremities. The burning sensation in her fingers and toes told her that feeling was returning, a good sign, though an agonizing one. "I wouldn't move just yet if I were you," came Frank's voice from somewhere behind her. "Frostbite's nothing to trifle with." He moved into her field of vision, carrying a steaming mug. Without his coat and hat, Kate could see him clearly for the first time. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 28 or 30, with a strong, square jaw shadowed with several days' worth of stubble. His eyes were a startling blue beneath straight brows, and his dark hair fell in waves to his collar. "Can you hold this?" he asked, offering the mug. "It's willow bark tea with honey. Help with the pain." Kate tried to take it, but her fingers refused to cooperate. Frank nodded as if he'd expected this and sat on the edge of the bed, lifting the mug to her lips. "Small sips," he instructed. "That's it." The tea was bitter despite the honey, but its warmth spread through her, and she drank gratefully. When she'd finished, Frank set the mug aside and studied her face. "You're lucky to be alive, miss. Another hour in that cold, and I'd have found a corpse instead of a woman." "Katherine Nelson," she managed, her voice scratchy. "Kate, thank you for saving my life, Mr. Morgan." A slight smile curved his lips. "Frank," he corrected. "And you're welcome, Miss Nelson. Mind telling me what you were doing under Blackwater Bridge in the middle of a blizzard?" Kate explained about her journey to Silver Creek, the teaching position, and her mishap with the horse. Frank listened without interrupting, then nodded. Silver Creek's still a good 15 miles north. No way to make that journey until this storm passes and you're recovered. He glanced toward the single window where snow continued to fall heavily. "Might be several days, maybe longer." "I don't want to impose," Kate began, but Frank waved away her concern. "No imposition. Can't very well throw you back into the snow, can I?" His smile took any sting from the words. "Rest now. We can talk more when you're feeling stronger." Over the next 2 days, Kate drifted in and out of sleep as her body recovered from its ordeal. Whenever she woke, Frank was there, offering broth or tea, checking her fingers and toes for signs of serious frostbite. To her relief, she'd escaped with only minor damage, painful, but not permanent. On the 3rd day, she awoke feeling significantly stronger. The cabin was empty, but a note on the table informed her that Frank had gone to check his traps and would return shortly. For the first time, Kate was able to take proper stock of her surroundings. The cabin was simple but comfortable, clearly built by someone who knew their craft. A bookshelf held a surprising number of volumes, not just practical manuals, but works of literature and philosophy. Thoreau's Walden sat alongside Shakespeare's collected plays and what appeared to be a well-worn Bible. With careful movements, Kate wrapped one of the quilts around her shoulders and made her way to the shelf. Her fingers traced the spines of the books, pausing on a leather-bound copy of The Iliad. "Homer's not exactly typical reading for a frontier cabin," she murmured to herself. "My father was a classics professor before he caught gold fever," came Frank's voice from the doorway. Kate turned, startled, to find him watching her with an amused expression. He stomped snow from his boots before entering, carrying several rabbits tied to his belt. "I didn't mean to snoop," Kate said, embarrassed. Frank shook his head as he hung his coat on a peg by the door. "No harm in curiosity. You're looking better today. Color's back in your cheeks." I feel much improved thanks to your care. Kate returned to the chair by the fire, suddenly aware that she was wearing only her chemise and petticoat beneath the quilt. Her dress and coat hung by the fire, long since dried. As if reading her thoughts, Frank said, I've been meaning to offer I have a spare shirt and trousers that might fit well enough until your clothes are more serviceable for getting around. Kate hesitated. The impropriety of wearing men's clothing warred with practicality. They're clean, he added with a hint of a smile, and a sight warmer than that dress for cabin living. Thank you, she relented. That's very kind. While Frank prepared the rabbits for stewing, Kate changed behind a makeshift screen he'd set up in the corner. The flannel shirt was comically large on her slender frame, and she had to roll the sleeves several times, but the trousers, cinched tight with a length of rope, were surprisingly comfortable. When she emerged, Frank glanced up from his work, his knife pausing midway through skinning a rabbit. Something flickered in his eyes' appreciation, perhaps before he returned to his task. Suits you, was all he said, but Kate felt a peculiar warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the fire. As the days passed, they fell into an easy routine. Frank would rise before dawn to check his traps and tend to his horse, returning mid-morning with game or to split more firewood. Kate took over the cooking and mending, grateful to have ways to repay his kindness. The blizzard showed no signs of abating. Snow continued to fall, sometimes lightly, sometimes in blinding sheets that obscured everything beyond the cabin's single window. The drifts grew higher, eventually reaching the window's edge. Worst storm I've seen in these parts, Frank commented one evening as they sat before the fire, Kate darning a sock while he whittled a piece of pine wood. Making up for the mild start to winter, I reckon. Do you think the school in Silver Creek will still want me when I finally arrive? Kate asked, voicing the worry that had been growing with each passing day. Frank considered this, his hands never pausing in their skilled work. Hard to say. Term was supposed to start after New Year's, wasn't it? Kate nodded miserably. It was already January 8th. Might be they found someone else by now, Frank admitted. But then again, qualified teachers aren't exactly thick on the ground out here. They might be grateful whenever you show up. And if they're not, the question emerged more vulnerably than Kate had intended. Frank looked up, his blue eyes meeting hers directly. Then you'll find something else. Seems to me you're not the type to give up easily, Miss Nelson. Kate, she corrected automatically. After nearly 2 weeks of sharing a one-room cabin, formality seemed absurd. A smile touched his lips. Kate, he agreed. That night, as Kate lay on the bed, Frank had insisted she take it while he made do with a pallet near the fire. She found herself studying his profile in the firelight. He was handsome in a rugged way, with lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he smiled often, though she'd seen little evidence of it. There was a quietness to him that spoke of solitude, yet nothing about him seemed lonely or bitter. Who are you, Francis Morgan? She wondered. What brought you to this isolated cabin, and why does a man who quotes Homer skinned rabbits for his supper? As if sensing her gaze, Frank turned his head, catching her watching him. Kate quickly closed her eyes, feigning sleep, but not before she saw the small smile that curved his lips. The next morning, Kate woke to silence. The howling wind that had been their constant companion for nearly 2 weeks had finally ceased. Sunlight streamed through the window, dazzling on the pristine snow outside. Storm's broken, Frank announced as he entered, bringing a blast of cold air and a load of firewood with him. Roads should be passable in a few days once things melt a bit. Kate's heart gave an unexpected lurch at his words, Of course, she needed to continue to Silver Creek if the position was still available or find other employment. She couldn't stay in Frank's cabin indefinitely, yet the thought of leaving filled her with a strange melancholy. "That's good news," she said, forcing enthusiasm into her voice. Frank stacked the wood neatly by the stove, his back to her. "Thought I might ride into town today, see if I can find news about Silver Creek. Maybe pick up some supplies." "Town? There's a settlement nearby. Redstone's about 7 miles east. Not much more than a trading post, saloon, and a few houses, but they'll have news." Kate nodded, trying to ignore the disappointment that he would leave even briefly. "Be careful," she said. "The snow." "I've navigated worse," he assured her with a slight smile. "I'll be back before dark." After Frank departed, Kate busied herself with chores, sweeping the already immaculate floor, organizing the pantry shelves. Anything to keep her mind off the strange emotions swirling within her. By mid-afternoon, she'd run out of tasks and found herself standing before the bookshelf once more. Her fingers traced the spine of the Iliad before pulling it from the shelf. Opening it, she discovered an inscription on the flyleaf. "To my son Francis on his 16th birthday. May you find wisdom in these ancient words as I have. Your loving father, Edward Morgan, Boston, 1866. Boston, a classics professor. The pieces began to fall into place. Frank was educated, cultured, even a far cry from the rough trappers and mountain men she'd expected to encounter in Wyoming territory. The sound of hoofbeats outside pulled Kate from her musings. She hastily returned the book to the shelf and moved to the window. Relief flooded her as she recognized Frank's broad-shouldered figure dismounting from his horse. He entered with a flurry of cold air and the scent of pine, his cheeks ruddy from the cold. "Got news," he announced without preamble, setting a package on the table. "Silver Creek hired a school teacher from Denver last week." Kate's heart sank. "I see. There's more," Frank continued, unwrapping his scarf. "Stagecoach came through Redstone this morning. Driver had a telegram for the sheriff about a Katherine Nelson, reported missing by her uncle in Missouri, offering a reward for information." The blood drained from Kate's face. "He's looking for me." Frank's expression hardened. "That uncle you mentioned, the one with the wandering hands, he's claiming you stole money before disappearing." "That's a lie," Kate exclaimed, indignation burning through her shock. "I took only what was rightfully mine, my mother's jewelry, and the money I'd earned teaching at the local school." "I figured as much," Frank said calmly. "But it complicates matters. Sheriff Dawson's an honest man, but $50 is a lot of reward money in these parts." Kate sank into a chair, her mind racing. "What am I to do now? Without the teaching position, I have nowhere to go, and if I show myself in any town—" "You could stay here." The words hung in the air between them, simple yet profound in their implications. "I couldn't possibly impose," Kate began. "It's not an imposition," Frank interrupted. "This cabin gets mighty quiet in winter, and I could use help with the trap lines come spring." Kate stared at him, trying to read his expression. "Why would you do this? You barely know me." Frank moved to the stove, avoiding her gaze as he stoked the fire. "Maybe I'm just being neighborly." "There's not another cabin for miles," Kate pointed out. A smile flickered across his face. "Then I'm being extremely neighborly." He turned to face her, suddenly serious. "Truth is, Kate, I've been alone a long time. Having you here these past weeks, it's been good. Reminds me there's more to life than trapping and hunting." The simple honesty of his words touched something deep within Kate. "I've enjoyed it too," she admitted softly. then stay, at least until spring. By then, the search will have died down, and we can figure out something more permanent. Something more permanent. The phrase echoed in Kate's mind, filled with unspoken possibilities. All right, she agreed. Until spring. Frank nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. Good, that's settled then. He reached for the package he'd placed on the table earlier. Got you something in town. Kate unwrapped the brown paper to find a bolt of blue calico fabric and a small packet of sewing notions. Thought you might be tired of wearing my old clothes, Frank explained, a touch of color rising in his cheeks. The storekeeper's wife helped me choose it, said it would bring out your eyes. Kate ran her fingers over the soft fabric, deeply touched by his thoughtfulness. It's beautiful. Thank you. Their eyes met, and something shifted between them, something neither was quite ready to name. The next few weeks passed in a comfortable rhythm. Kate used the fabric to fashion a simple dress and began helping Frank with his daily chores. He taught her to set traps for rabbits and squirrels, to identify animal tracks in the snow, and to shoot his old Winchester rifle. Never know when you might need to defend yourself out here, he explained as he positioned her hands on the weapon, or put meat on the table if I'm not around. Kate found she had a natural aptitude for shooting, much to Frank's evident pride. You're a quick study, he remarked after she hit a pine cone at 50 paces. I had an excellent teacher, she replied, enjoying the pleased expression that crossed his face. In the evenings they sat before the fire, sometimes reading aloud from Frank's books, sometimes simply talking. Kate learned that Frank had indeed grown up in Boston, the only child of a Harvard professor and his wife. When his mother died of tuberculosis, his father had been consumed by grief and the lure of Western gold. We came out in '68, right after the war, Frank explained. Father had this notion he'd strike it rich in Colorado, then return to Boston triumphant. Instead, he died of typhoid in a mining camp outside Denver. I'm so sorry, Kate said, genuinely moved by his matter-of-fact recounting of such tragedy. Frank shrugged, though his eyes held old pain. I was 19. Old enough to make my own way. Tried my hand at ranching, mining, even rode for the Pony Express for a spell before they shut down. Nothing stuck until I found this valley 5 years back. Something about this place felt like home from the first moment I saw it. Kate understood exactly what he meant. Despite its isolation, or perhaps because of it, the cabin and the surrounding valley had a peaceful quality that soothed the soul. The majestic mountains rising in the distance, the clear creek that ran nearby, the way the sun set behind the western ridge, painting the snow in shades of gold and pink. It was a place of rare beauty. What about you, Frank asked. You've told me about your uncle, but not much about before. Kate hesitated, then shared the story of her childhood in St. Louis, her father's successful mercantile business, and the cholera epidemic that claimed both her parents when she was 19. Uncle Jeremiah was my father's only living relative, she explained. When the business was sold to pay father's debts, I had nowhere else to go. And he betrayed that trust, Frank said, anger evident in his voice. Kate nodded. It started small comments about my appearance, standing too close. I told myself I was imagining things. Then one night, he came to my room, drunk. I managed to fight him off, but I knew I couldn't stay. Frank's hand curled into a fist on his knee. If I ever meet this uncle of yours, he's not worth the trouble, Kate said firmly. I've put him behind me? February arrived with milder weather. The snow began to recede, revealing patches of brown earth beneath. One particularly fine day, Frank suggested they ride to a nearby plateau that offered views of the entire valley. "You've been cooped up too long," he insisted when Kate protested that she had bread to bake. "The bread can wait." They set out mid-morning, Kate riding Frank's gentle mare while he took the more spirited stallion. The air was crisp but not bitterly cold, and the sun shone brilliantly in a cloudless sky. As they climbed higher, the vista expanded around them, endless forests of pine and spruce, snow-capped mountains in the distance, and the silver ribbon of a river winding through it all. "It's breathtaking," Kate murmured when they reached the plateau. Frank dismounted and helped her down from the mare, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. "Worth postponing the bread?" "Definitely," she agreed, smiling up at him. They spread a blanket on a dry patch of ground and shared the lunch Kate had packed: cold venison, hard cheese, and apples Frank had traded for in Redstone. As they ate, Frank pointed out landmarks: the distant smoke from Redstone's chimneys, the pass that led to Silver Creek, the mountain range where he'd once tracked a grizzly for 3 days. "You love it here, don't you?" Kate observed. Frank nodded, his gaze sweeping over the landscape. "Never felt like I belonged anywhere until I found this valley. Still don't know if I'm running to something or away from something, but it feels right." "I understand that," Kate said softly. "I've been looking for that feeling my whole life." Their eyes met, and Frank reached out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers brushing her cheek. Kate's breath caught at the tenderness of the gesture. "Kate," he began, his voice husky, but whatever he intended to say was interrupted by a distant crack that echoed across the valley. Frank was on his feet instantly, his relaxed demeanor replaced by alertness. "Rifle shot," he said tersely, "coming from near the cabin." They packed up hastily and mounted their horses. Frank led them down a different path than they had ascended, moving with a stealth that spoke of years navigating the wilderness. As they approached the cabin, he signaled for Kate to stop in a sheltered grove of pines. "Stay here," he whispered, drawing his rifle from its scabbard. "If there's trouble, ride east toward Redstone and find Sheriff Dawson." Before Kate could protest, he was gone, moving silently through the trees toward the cabin. Heart pounding, she waited, straining to hear any sound beyond the soft nickering of the horses and the whisper of wind through the pines. Long minutes passed. Kate was just considering disobeying Frank's order when he reappeared, his expression grim. "Poachers," he explained, returning his rifle to its scabbard. "Shot a deer on my land. They're gone now, but they left their kill behind when they heard us coming." "Is that common?" Kate asked, relief making her voice unsteady. Frank shook his head. "Not around here. Most folks respect boundaries." He helped her mount, his movements brusque with lingering tension. "I'll dress the meat when we get back. No sense wasting it." The mood of the day had been broken. They returned to the cabin in silence, Frank's eyes constantly scanning the tree line, his body tense with vigilance. Kate found herself doing the same, suddenly aware of how vulnerable they were in this isolated place. That evening, as Frank worked at the table cleaning his rifle, Kate asked the question that had been troubling her since the incident on the plateau. "Do you think they were really poachers?" Frank's hand stilled on the weapon. "What do you mean?" "The timing seems suspicious. We're gone from the cabin for the first time in weeks, and suddenly there are men with rifles near our home." "Our home." The phrase slipped out naturally, and neither commented on it, though Frank's eyes flickered to hers briefly. "You think they might have been looking for you?" he said. It wasn't a question. Kate nodded. $50 is a lot of money. My uncle won't give up easily. Frank resumed cleaning the rifle, his movements methodical. Could be you're right. I'll ride to Redstone tomorrow, see what Sheriff Dawson knows. I'll come with you, Kate decided. That's not wise, if your uncle has men searching. I can't hide forever, Frank, Kate interrupted, and I won't have you risking yourself while I cower in the cabin. We'll go together or not at all. A slow smile spread across Frank's face. Stubborn woman, he muttered, but there was admiration in his tone. I preferred determined, Kate replied primly. Frank's chuckle was warm and genuine. Determined it is, then. We'll both go, but you'll need to stay out of sight while I talk to Dawson, and we'll take precautions on the trail. The next morning dawned clear and mild. They set out at first light, Frank leading them on a circuitous route that followed game trails rather than the more established path to town. Kate wore Frank's spare hat pulled low and one of his coats, which effectively disguised her feminine figure from a distance. Redstone proved to be exactly as Frank had described it, little more than a collection of rough buildings clustered around a single dusty street. The trading post doubled as a post office, while the saloon seemed to serve as the social center of the tiny community. A small church stood at one end of the street, and a squat, sturdy building with a sign declaring it the sheriff's office occupied the other. Frank left Kate with the horses behind the trading post while he sought out Sheriff Dawson. She waited anxiously, keeping her hat brim low whenever someone passed by. After what seemed an eternity but was likely only 20 minutes, Frank returned, his expression troubled. Dawson says there's been a new notice, he reported in a low voice as he helped Kate mount. Your uncle's doubled the reward to $100 and added a charge of assault. Claims you struck him with a fireplace poker before fleeing. Kate's hands tightened on the reins. That's partially true. He came at me and I defended myself. I did hit him, but only to get away. Dawson's a good man. He's suspicious of the changing story, but $100 has people talking. There have been strangers asking questions in town the past few days. The men near our cabin yesterday, Kate concluded. Frank nodded grimly. Likely so. Dawson says they were staying at the saloon but cleared out this morning, headed north. Toward Silver Creek, Kate said, her heart sinking. They must think I continued on there. For now, Frank agreed, but they'll be back when they find no trace of you there. We need to be careful. They made their purchases quickly, coffee, flour, salt, and ammunition, and left town by a different route than they had arrived. Frank led them on an even more convoluted path home, frequently stopping to check for signs of pursuit. They were within 2 miles of the cabin when Frank suddenly raised his hand in a signal to halt. He dismounted silently, gesturing for Kate to do the same. Leading the horses into a dense thicket of pines, he tethered them securely before returning to Kate's side. Someone's following us, he whispered. Stay here with the horses. Don't move unless I signal. Before Kate could protest, he melted into the forest, moving with the silent grace of a mountain lion. Heart pounding, she pressed herself against a tree trunk, straining to hear anything beyond the soft breathing of the horses and the occasional call of a bird overhead. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Just as Kate was considering going to look for Frank, a twig snapped nearby. She froze, hardly daring to breathe as footsteps approached her hiding place. Just me, came Frank's voice, moments before he appeared around a massive pine. False alarm, deer moving through the underbrush. Kate sagged with relief. You're sure? Frank nodded, though his eyes remained watchful. Found tracks, but we should still be cautious. Let's get home before dark. They reached the cabin without further incident, but the sense of unease lingered. That night, Frank barred the door, something he had never done before, and kept his rifle within arm's reach as they sat before the fire. "Perhaps I should leave," Kate said suddenly, breaking the tense silence. "Find somewhere else to go, somewhere my troubles won't endanger you." Frank's head snapped up, his blue eyes intense in the firelight. "Is that what you want?" "No," Kate admitted softly, "but I can't bear the thought of bringing danger to your door after all you've done for me." Frank set aside the piece of wood he'd been whittling and moved to sit beside her on the bench. "Kate," he said, taking her hand in his, "your troubles became mine the moment I found you under that bridge. I don't regret it for a second." The warmth of his hand around hers sent a flutter through Kate's chest. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why would you take on such risk for a stranger?" Frank's gaze dropped to their joined hands. "You stopped being a stranger a long time ago," he said quietly. After his moment, he looked up, something resolute in his expression. "I care for you, Kate. More than I should, perhaps. More than I've cared for anyone in a very long time." The simple declaration hung in the air between them, honest and unadorned. Kate's heart hammered against her ribs as she recognized the truth of her own feelings mirrored in his words. "I care for you too," she confessed, her voice steadier than she expected. "These past weeks, they've meant everything to me." Frank's free hand rose to cup her cheek, his calloused palm gentle against her skin. "Then stay, not just until spring. Stay with me, Kate." "Frank," she began, but whatever she might have said was lost as his lips met hers in a tender kiss. It was a gentle thing at first, a question more than a demand. But when Kate leaned into him, her hand coming up to rest against his chest, the kiss deepened into something more profound. His arms encircled her, drawing her closer as years of solitude and loneliness melted away in the warmth of their embrace. When they finally parted, both breathless, Frank rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that for weeks," he admitted with a soft chuckle. "Why didn't you?" Kate asked, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "Wasn't sure you felt the same. Didn't want to presume." His smile turned rueful. "And it didn't seem right with you having nowhere else to go. Didn't want you to feel obligated." The consideration behind his restraint only deepened Kate's feelings for him. "I've never felt obligated, Frank, only grateful, and increasingly attached." He kissed her again, briefly but with unmistakable passion. "We should get some rest," he said reluctantly. "Tomorrow I want to set some snares farther up the valley, see if we can catch whoever's been nosing around." Kate nodded, though she was reluctant to break the moment between them. "Be careful, Frank. I couldn't bear it if something happened to you because of me." He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch lingering. "Nothing will happen to either of us, I promise." The next morning, Frank set out before dawn to place his snares, leaving Kate with strict instructions to keep the rifle close and bar the door behind him. The day passed slowly. Each creak of the cabin's timbers and rustle of wind through the pines setting her nerves on edge. By mid-afternoon, with no sign of Frank's return, Kate's anxiety had grown to genuine worry. She paced the small confines of the cabin, alternately watching out the window and stirring the stew she'd prepared for Frank's return. When the shadows began to lengthen across the snow-covered yard, Kate made a decision. Taking the rifle and a small pack of supplies, she left the cabin and headed in the direction Frank had gone that morning. The tracks he'd left were still visible, though partially obscured by the day's melt and freeze cycle. She followed his trail for nearly a mile, her concern growing with each passing minute. Then, in a small clearing, she found evidence of a struggle-trampled snow, broken branches, and most alarmingly, spots of blood staining the white ground. "Frank!" she called, fear making her voice crack. "Frank, are you here?" Only silence answered her. Fighting down panic, Kate examined the scene more carefully. Multiple sets of tracks led away from the clearing, two men, one apparently dragging something heavy. With growing dread, she followed these tracks, moving as quietly as she could through the underbrush. The trail led to a small hunting cabin about half a mile from Frank's property. Smoke rose from the chimney, and through the single window, Kate could make out movement inside. Crouching behind a fallen log, she considered her options. She could return to Frank's cabin and wait, hoping whoever had taken him would release him unharmed. She could try to make it to Redstone and bring back Sheriff Dawson, though that would take hours. Or she could attempt to help Frank herself right now. The decision was made for her when the cabin door opened and a burly man with a matted beard stepped out, a rifle slung over his shoulder. He was followed by a second man, taller and leaner, with a puckered scar running from his left eye to his mouth. "Waste of time, if you ask me," the bearded man was saying. "Girl's probably halfway to Canada by now." "Shut up, Hank," the scarred man replied. "Morgan knows where she is. He'll talk eventually." Kate's blood ran cold. They had Frank, and they were looking for her. The scarred man went to a woodpile and began gathering logs, while the bearded one, Hank, moved around to the back of the cabin, presumably to relieve himself. It was now or never. Taking a deep breath, Kate emerged from her hiding place and approached the scarred man from behind, the rifle leveled at his back. "Don't move," she commanded, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Hands where I can see them." The man froze, then slowly raised his hands. "Well, well," he drawled, "if it ain't Miss Katherine Nelson herself, come to save her boyfriend." "Where is he?" Kate demanded, keeping the rifle trained on him as she circled to face him. "If you've hurt him—" "He's inside," the man said, his scarred face twisting into a cruel smile. "Bit worse for wear, but still breathing. For now." "We're going inside," Kate said. "Slowly. Any tricks and I'll shoot you where you stand." The man's eyes narrowed as he assessed her. Whatever he saw in her face must have convinced him she meant business, because he nodded slightly. "After you, Miss Nelson." "Nice try, you first. Keep those hands high." She marched him to the cabin door, constantly aware that Hank could return at any moment. Inside, the cabin was dark and smoky. It took a moment for Kate's eyes to adjust, but when they did, she saw Frank tied to a chair in the center of the room. His face was bruised, blood caked at the corner of his mouth, but his eyes widened with recognition and alarm when he saw her. "Kate, no! Get out of here!" he shouted, struggling against his bonds. Before Kate could respond, something hard slammed into the back of her head, sending her sprawling. The rifle clattered from her grasp as stars exploded behind her eyes. Through blurred vision, she saw Hank standing over her, having entered through another door she hadn't noticed. "Looky what we caught," he grinned, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. "Uncle Jeremiah's gonna be real pleased." "Don't touch her!" Frank roared, his chair rocking with the force of his struggle. The scarred man picked up Kate's fallen rifle, examining it with appreciation. "Nice weapon," he commented. "Yours, Morgan? You should teach your woman to be more careful who she sneaks up on." Kate struggled to her knees, her head throbbing. "My uncle sent you," she stated, glaring at the scarred man. "Nathaniel Cross." He introduced himself with a mocking half-bow. Your uncle's very concerned about your welfare, Miss Nelson. Hired me and Hank here to bring you home safe and sound. Along with the money and jewelry I supposedly stole? Kate asked bitterly. Cross shrugged. That too, if you've got it. But mostly he wants you back where you belong. She belongs here, Frank said, his voice tight with pain and anger. With me. Cross chuckled, the sound devoid of humor. That right? You planning to make an honest woman of her, Morgan? Or just keeping her warm through the winter? Let him go, Kate pleaded, ignoring the taunt. He has nothing to do with this. It's me you want. Can't do that, Cross said, almost regretfully. He's seen our faces. Besides, your uncle was quite specific about dealing with anyone who might have compromised his niece's virtue. The implication sent a chill through Kate. These men weren't just bounty hunters, they were killers. My uncle has no right, she began, but Cross cut her off with a wave of the rifle. Save it for him. We're leaving at first light. Got a long journey ahead. He nodded to Hank. Tie her up. I'll keep watch outside in case Morgan here has any friends nearby. Hank approached Kate with a length of rope. As he reached for her wrists, she made her move, driving her knee upward with all her strength. Hank doubled over with a howl of pain, and Kate scrambled for the knife at his belt, yanking it free before he could recover. Cross leveled the rifle at her. Drop it, girl. Kate, do what he says, Frank urged, his eyes desperate. Kate slowly straightened, the knife clutched in her hand. Let Frank go, and I'll come quietly. You have my word. Cross laughed. You're not exactly in a position to negotiate. I am. Kate raised the knife to her own throat. My uncle wants me alive, doesn't he? How much is he paying you if you bring back a corpse? The cabin fell silent, save for Hank's pained wheezing as he recovered on the floor. Cross's scarred face twisted with calculation. You wouldn't, he said, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. Try me, Kate challenged, pressing the blade against her skin just enough to draw a thin line of blood. I'd rather die here than go back to my uncle's house. Frank made a strangled sound of protest, but Kate kept her eyes locked on Cross. After a long moment, Cross lowered the rifle slightly. All right, what's your offer? Untie Frank and let him go. Give him a 5-minute head start. He'll go for help, but by then we'll be long gone. You'll have me, which is all my uncle really wants. Cross considered this, then nodded slowly. Deal. But you try anything, and Hank puts a bullet at your lover boy's back before he reaches the tree line. I understand, Kate said. Cross gestured for Hank to untie Frank. The bearded man did so reluctantly. Keeping his distance from Kate and her knife, once free, Frank stood shakily, his gaze never leaving Kate's face. I'm not leaving you, he said flatly. Yes, you are, she insisted, willing him to understand. Please, Frank, it's the only way. Listen to your woman, Morgan, Cross advised. She's buying your life. I were you, I'd take the offer and run. Frank's jaw clenched, but something in Kate's expression must have communicated her plan, because after a tense moment, he gave a barely perceptible nod. 5 minutes, Cross reminded him as Frank moved toward the door. Starting now. Frank paused at the threshold, his eyes meeting Kate's one last time. I'll find you, he promised. Then he was gone, disappearing into the gathering dusk. Cross immediately turned to Kate, drop the knife, and sit down. Hank, tie her hands. Front, not back. I don't trust her not to try something stupid. Kate surrendered the knife, allowing Hank to bind her wrists before her. Her mind raced, counting the seconds, hoping Frank was moving quickly through the forest. Your uncle's going to be disappointed, Cross remarked conversationally as he checked the bindings. He was quite specific about bringing back both his niece and any man who might have tarnished the family honor. "My uncle cares nothing for honor," Kate spat. "Only control." Cross shrugged. "Not my concern. I just collect the bounty." 4 minutes passed in tense silence. Kate strained to hear any sound from outside, any indication of what Frank might be doing. At precisely the 5-minute mark, Cross nodded to Hank. "Go make sure Morgan's well on his way and not circling back to play hero." Hank grinned unpleasantly and picked up his shotgun. "Gladly." As he reached for the door, a deafening blast shook the cabin. The door exploded inward in a shower of splinters, catching Hank full in the face. He went down with a gurgled scream as Frank charged through the opening, Sheriff Dawson and 2 deputies behind him. "Drop the gun, Cross!" Dawson bellowed. Cross swore violently and grabbed Kate, pressing his pistol to her temple. "Back off, or she dies." Everything froze. Kate could feel Cross's ragged breathing against her ear, smell the sour stink of his sweat. "You're surrounded, Cross," Dawson said more calmly. "There's no way out. Let the lady go, and maybe you won't hang for this." "I'm walking out of here," Cross insisted, dragging Kate toward the back door. "With her. Anyone tries to stop me, I pull the trigger." Kate caught Frank's eye across the room. His face was a mask of barely contained fury, but there was something else there too, a question. She gave him the slightest of nods. In one fluid motion, Kate went limp in Cross's grasp. The sudden dead weight threw him off balance, and his grip on her loosened just enough. Frank lunged forward, tackling Cross to the ground. The pistol discharged with a deafening crack, the bullet embedding itself in the ceiling as the 2 men grappled on the floor. Dawson and his deputies swarmed forward. Within moments, Cross was subdued, cursing and bleeding from a split lip where Frank had landed a solid punch. Frank immediately went to Kate, cutting her bonds with his hunting knife and gathering her into his arms. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his hands gentle as they examined the small cut at her throat. "I'm fine," Kate assured him, shaking despite her words. "How did you—" "I wasn't about to leave you," Frank interrupted. "The moment I was out of sight, I circled back and headed for the main trail. Ran into Dawson and his men on their way up. Seems someone in town got suspicious of Cross and Hank asking too many questions." Sheriff Dawson approached, his weathered face grave. "Miss Nelson, I presume. Your uncle's been causing quite a stir with those notices of his." Kate tensed, but Frank's arm around her shoulders was reassuring. "Yes, Sheriff. I'm Katherine Nelson." Dawson nodded thoughtfully. "Funny thing about those notices, they keep changing. First you stole money, then you assaulted him, then you were mentally unsound and in need of protection. Makes a man wonder what the real story might be." "My uncle is not the man he pretends to be," Kate said carefully. "So Morgan here was telling me," Dawson agreed. "Said your uncle had improper designs on his own niece. That true, miss?" Kate nodded, shame and anger warring within her. "Yes, Sheriff, that's why I fled." Dawson sighed heavily. "Thought as much. Seen his type before." He glanced at Cross, now securely handcuffed. "Hiring killers to retrieve a family member tells me all I need to know about Jeremiah Nelson's character." "What happens now?" Frank asked, his arm still protectively around Kate. "Well, Cross and his friend here." Dawson nudged Hank's motionless form with his boot. "They'll face charges for assault and attempted murder. As for Miss Nelson—" He studied Kate thoughtfully. "Way I see it, you're a grown woman who left an intolerable situation. No crime in that." Relief flooded through Kate. "Thank you, Sheriff." Dawson waved away her thanks. "Don't thank me yet. Your uncle might still come looking himself, or hire more men like Cross. He won't find her, Frank said with quiet determination. Something in his tone made Dawson raise an eyebrow. That right? And why's that? Morgan. Frank looked down at Kate, his blue eyes filled with an emotion that made her heart skip. Because if she'll have me, Katherine Nelson is going to become Katherine Morgan, and we'll be starting fresh somewhere her uncle will never think to look. The proposal, so matter-of-fact in the aftermath of violence, nonetheless brought tears to Kate's eyes. Yes, she whispered, reaching up to touch his bruised face. Yes, I'll have you. Dawson cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the display of emotion. Well then, that's settled. Judge Wilson makes his circuit through Redstone next week. He can perform the ceremony legal and proper. Thank you, Sheriff, Frank said, not taking his eyes off Kate. Don't mention it. Now, let's get you folks home. Been a long day, and these two, he gestured to Cross and the now groaning Hank, need a cell for the night. The ride back to Frank's cabin was silent, both of them too exhausted for conversation. Sheriff Dawson and his deputies accompanied them, ensuring no other threats lurked in the gathering darkness. After checking the property and finding it secure, Dawson left one deputy to stand watch overnight, promising to return in the morning to take their formal statements. Alone at last in the cabin, Frank built up the fire while Kate prepared a simple meal. The normalcy of the tasks was soothing after the day's trauma, but there was a new awareness between them, touches lingering, glances holding meaning beyond words. As they sat before the fire later, Kate nestled against Frank's side, his arm around her shoulders. Did you mean it? She asked softly. About leaving? Frank nodded, his cheek resting against her hair. If that's what you want, we could go west to Oregon or north to Montana, somewhere your uncle wouldn't think to look. Kate considered this, watching the flames dance in the fireplace. This valley is your home, she said after a moment. You love it here. I love you more, Frank replied simply. Home is wherever you are now, Kate. The words, spoken without hesitation or doubt, filled Kate with a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. What if we didn't have to leave, she suggested. Sheriff Dawson seems to believe my story over my uncle's, and once we're married. A husband has legal protection over his wife, Frank finished thoughtfully. Your uncle would have no claim on you then. Exactly. Kate turned in his arms to face him. I've been running long enough, Frank. I want to build something here with you, a life, a family. Frank's eyes darkened with emotion. His hand came up to cup her cheek, thumb brushing over her lips. Nothing would make me happier, he murmured before capturing her mouth in a kiss that promised a lifetime of tomorrows. The following week passed in a blur of preparation. Word of their engagement spread quickly through the small community of Redstone. To Kate's surprise and Frank's evident pride, their neighbors rallied around them with unexpected generosity. Mrs. Holloway, the storekeeper's wife, insisted on altering her own wedding dress for Kate. Been saving it for my daughter, but she's off in Denver with no plans to marry anytime soon, she explained as she pinned the ivory silk. Besides, every bride deserves something special. The saloon owner, a gruff widower named Silas Jenkins, donated 3 bottles of his finest whiskey for the celebration. Been waiting years for Morgan to find himself a woman, he declared. Was beginning to think he was part bear the way he hibernates up in that cabin. Even Sheriff Dawson contributed, arranging for Judge Wilson to stay an extra day in Redstone specifically to perform their ceremony. Got a telegram from St. Louis, he informed them 2 days before the wedding. Seems your uncle's reputation isn't as sterling as he'd like folks to believe. Several young women have come forward with similar accusations since your disappearance made the papers. He won't be looking for me anymore? Kate asked, hardly daring to hope. Dawson's weathered face creased in a rare smile. Oh, I reckon he's got more pressing concerns now. St. Louis authorities are investigating him for various improprieties. His business partners are distancing themselves. Man like that cares more about his social standing than anything else. You're the least of his worries now. The news lifted the last shadow from their happiness. With the threat of her uncle's pursuit removed, Kate threw herself into making Frank's cabin, their cabin now, into a true home. She hung curtains at the windows, laid out her few possessions alongside his, and began planning a small garden for the spring. Frank watched her nesting activities with amused affection. Never seen anyone so happy about housekeeping, he teased as she rearranged his books for the third time. I've never had a real home before, Kate explained, smoothing her hand over the shelf. Not since my parents died. This is ours, Frank. Something we're building together. His expression softened, and he pulled her into his arms. I like the sound of that, he murmured against her hair. Ours. Their wedding day dawned clear and mild, a perfect early March morning. The snow had receded to patches in the shadowed places, and the first crocuses were poking through the soil in sheltered spots. Kate took it as a good omen, new life emerging after the long winter, just as new hope had bloomed in her heart after years of fear and loneliness. Mrs. Holloway helped her dress in the back room of the trading post, fussing over the fall of the ivory silk and arranging Kate's hair with motherly concern. You look beautiful, dear, she declared, stepping back to admire her work. That Frank Morgan's a lucky man. I'm the lucky one, Kate replied, smoothing the unfamiliar silk with trembling hands. A few months ago I had nothing. No home, no future. Just fear. Mrs. Holloway's eyes softened with understanding. And now? A smile bloomed on Kate's face, radiant with happiness. Now I have everything. The ceremony took place in Redstone's small church, filled to capacity with what seemed like every resident of the tiny settlement. Frank waited at the altar, looking uncharacteristically nervous in a new black suit, his dark hair freshly trimmed. When Kate appeared in the doorway, a simple bouquet of pine boughs and early spring flowers in her hands, his face transformed. The nervousness vanished, replaced by a look of such naked adoration that Kate's steps faltered. This man, this good, brave, gentle man, was to be her husband. The thought both humbled and exalted her. Judge Wilson kept the ceremony brief but meaningful. When he pronounced them husband and wife, Frank's kiss was both tender and possessive, a promise of the night to come and all the nights thereafter. The celebration afterward at the saloon was unlike anything Kate had ever experienced. There was music from a fiddle and harmonica, dancing that grew increasingly boisterous as Silas's whiskey flowed freely, and a feast contributed by every household in the settlement. Didn't know I had so many friends, Frank murmured in Kate's ear as they shared a rare, quiet moment. They respect you, Kate replied, watching the revelry with contentment. And now they're your family too. Our family. Frank's arm tightened around her waist. Our family, he repeated, the words a vow. As the evening waned, they slipped away from the celebration, declining offers of a wagon ride in favor of walking the trail home in the silvery moonlight. The night was cool but not cold, the stars brilliant overhead in the vast Wyoming sky. Happy, Mrs. Morgan? Frank asked, his hand warm around hers as they walked. Kate's heart swelled at the new name. Happier than I ever imagined possible, she admitted. And you? Any regrets about taking in a half-frozen stranger? Frank stopped, turning her to face him. In the moonlight, his eyes were dark and serious. "Only one," he said, "that I didn't find you sooner." He kissed her then, deeply and thoroughly there on the moonlit trail with the mountains standing sentinel around them. When they finally continued homeward, it was with quickened steps and anticipation warming their blood. Their cabin welcomed them with the warm glow of the fire they'd banked that morning. Frank swept Kate into his arms to carry her across the threshold, an action that made her laugh with delight. "This isn't our first time entering this cabin together," she pointed out as he set her carefully on her feet inside. "No," he agreed, his voice husky as he closed and barred the door behind them. "But it's our first time as husband and wife, and some traditions are worth honoring." The night that followed was one of discovery and passion, of tender words and fervent promises whispered in the firelight. Kate gave herself to Frank with joy and wonder, finding in his arms the home she had always sought. As they lay entwined in the aftermath, Kate's head pillowed on Frank's chest, she listened to the steady beat of his heart and marveled at the journey that had brought them to this moment. "What are you thinking?" Frank asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. Kate smiled, pressing a kiss to his skin. "I was thinking about that bridge. How close I came to freezing to death there. How different everything would be if you hadn't come along when you did." Frank's arms tightened around her. "I still remember how you looked, all huddled up against the stone. Thought you were a dream at first, or maybe a spirit. And instead, I was just a half-frozen woman with nowhere to go," Kate said softly. Frank rolled to face her, his expression serious in the dim light. "You were everything I didn't know I was looking for," he corrected. "My future, my heart." Tears pricked at Kate's eyes at the simple poetry of the words. "I love you, Francis Morgan," she whispered. "With everything I am." His kiss was a benediction, a promise, a future unfolding before them. "And I love you, Katherine Morgan, until my last breath and beyond." Spring came fully to the valley in the weeks that followed. Kate planted her garden, coaxing tender seedlings from the rich mountain soil. Frank expanded the cabin, adding a second room in preparation for the family they both hoped would come. Together, they built a life rich in simple pleasures and profound joy. On warm evenings, they often walked to the plateau where they had picnicked that February day, watching the sun set behind the mountains and making plans for their future. Sometimes they rode to Blackwater Bridge, where Frank had found Kate that fateful December night. They would sit beneath its stone arch, Kate nestled in Frank's arms, and marvel at how a moment of desperate chance had led to such happiness. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't come along that night?" Kate asked on one such visit, as the late summer sun dappled the creek beneath the bridge. Frank was silent for a long moment, his arms secure around her. "I try not to," he admitted finally. "The thought of you alone in that cold, it still haunts me sometimes." Kate turned in his embrace to cup his face between her palms. "But you did come," she reminded him. "You found me. You wrapped me in your arms and whispered warmth back into my soul." Frank captured her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "And I always will," he promised, "through every winter, through every storm, for all the days of our lives." And he did. Through the birth of their first child the following spring, a daughter they named Hope. Through the harsh winter 3 years later when influenza swept through the valley. Through the prosperity that came with Frank's successful venture into horse breeding. and the respected position Kate eventually held as Redstone's schoolteacher. Their love, born in the desperate cold of a Wyoming winter, burned ever stronger with the passing years. And on cold nights, even decades later, Frank still held Kate close, his arms a shelter and a sanctuary, whispering warmth into her heart, long after the bridge where they first met had crumbled to dust.